everyone. It is Ella. Hello, happy Thursday. I went live on my alt on Instagram by accident and then wondered why no one was tuning in to watch, and it's because it was my alt. This is not an invitation to go find my alt, but hello. I'm really excited because tonight I'm going to be talking to my Twitter friend Rainesford about her book, An Ordinary Age. She's going to be popping in. I probably confused her by going live on the wrong account. So we'll see when she joins. But Rainesford is a great writer who I really admire, who I started reading her work online. She's written for a bunch of publications about emerging adulthood and the challenges that folks in Gen Z and younger millennials face, particularly when it comes to work and wellness and success and capitalism, etc. There she is. I think that I can add her. We'll see. I haven't done an Instagram live in a while. Invite people to go live with me. The request. I'm very rusty. I've been messing up all day today, but that is okay. Yay! Hello!
Hey, I
Hi!
the phone. I was so nervous about just the logging on part. This is like the second or third time I've ever done one of these.
You did a great job. I'm the one who messed up because I went live on my alt and then was like, where is everyone? But we figured it out.
That's perfect. We can do it on that one and we'll just have like a private chat. That works too.
It'll be just us FaceTiming for an audience of no one. Well, hello. It's so nice to chat with you. I haven't seen your face in real time in a while.
I know, it's been a little bit, and this is so fun because I feel like I've been a fan of your work for so long that I pinch myself moments where it's like, we're Twitter friends, we're social media friends.
We are, and I've felt exactly the same way. I was talking to our mutual friend Courtney long before we became friends. I was like, I feel like Rainesford is so cool, and her work is so cool, and I want to be her buddy.
Oh my!
And Courtney, thankfully, is very extroverted and was like, we're adopting you as a friend. So, yay, hello.
I'm very thankful to be part of that trio. I feel like you two are just two of the most insightful, hilarious, awesome to be around people that I've ever encountered. So
Thank you.
good things can come from the internet. Maybe not always, but when it's good, it's really good.
Yeah, on that topic, I feel like a lesson that I've learned as an emerging adult, or at least at the very end of that phase, because I just turned 29, I'm like literally at the end of that bracket, is that there's a lot of benefit in just creating the connections and the friendships that you want and leaving behind that kind of anxiety of, is this person going to respond? Am I being too weird? Like, one of the values that I'm trying to embody as I leave my emerging adulthood is just invest in the people and the friendships that you want to. And sometimes that means saying like, hey, Rainesford, I really liked your book. Can I help you sell it?
Which I was enthusiastically like, oh my God, thank you. No, I think that that's such a good point because I think that there's this myth that probably permeates the lifespan, but I think there's something about this young adult phase in particular where there's this myth that you're surrounded by BFFs like all the time. You never really have to work to make friends. Friends are just kind of something that it's assumed everybody has. And not only that, it's a group of friends. So it's not even one-on-one relation. This idea that you're kind of folding into a larger whole. And I think that that messes with us in a variety of ways. The first is it's shocking when you find out that you're lonely. It's shocking to find out that you can be lonely and surrounded by people and technically social and technically having friends. So I think that there's a lot to be said for reaching out to people and trying to create, exactly as you said, kind of the community you want to be part of instead of thinking you're the only one that's maybe missing that.
Yeah, I think about like, where did I get that sense of having a group and a clique of friends? And like, I watched a lot of the show Friends when I was a teenager, and it's a group of 6 people who are like loyal to a point of absurdity to each other and to the group. And I was like, I'm going to move to New York and I'm going to have my 5 other friends who I sit in a coffee house with all day. And like, that, it's not really how it works when you're in your 20s and 30s. But I think that's very true. And yeah, so I've kind of rambled a bit about the book, but you talk a lot about success and what does success look like, the pressure to be exceptional, and how for young people, not only is that incredibly painful, like the pressure that we put on young people, but the world is not set up to help young people then reach the goals that they're told that they should strive toward. So that's my like, that's kind of what I took away from it. But how would you describe the book, and like has your conception of the book changed at all since you've been sharing it with the world? Like have other people taken away really weird stuff from it?
Oh my gosh, I don't think anyone's taken away anything weird. I think the most disturbing and simultaneous
Mm.
gratifying thing is that I haven't encountered anybody yet that doesn't see some glimmer of their life and a pressure they've experienced in it somehow, even if it's, you know, a very different pressure, even if it's more tangible, even when the circumstances are really different. This chronic never enoughness really does seem like something that has impacted everybody at some point. And I think it's exactly as you described. I think that we're kind of handed this set of not even goals, but almost kind of a checklist or a list of
Yeah.
objectives, what it means to be a good young adult. You've got the right amount of adventure, the right amount of responsibility. You know what you're doing. You've got a plan. You're ambitious. All this, all these things, these endless check marks. And then I think that most of us have the realization where we step out into the world, we fail, we get into something and realize the thing we thought we wanted actually isn't what we want or need at all. All of these very normal realizations that we have about life throughout our lives. Like, who am I and what does it mean and how am I going to figure it out? And then I think the problem kicks in is number one, we don't give all people, but especially young people, any of the resources to go out and build these lives we've told them that they're
Mm.
have. And I think second to that is that it's still this one size fits all kind of thing where you're never supposed to falter or second guess or be anything other than the best version of whoever you could be. And as you know, I mean, it's not realistic and it's also completely exhausting.
Yeah. Yeah. And like there's this idea that it's linear too, that you're all
Oh,
going up as opposed to like sometimes shit happens or someone gets sick or you get fired or you have a career change. Like there's this path that you're supposed to be on and it's a stairway and there's no other option. And then if you deviate at all, you've either quit or you're a failure or you're average. Like that was something I was rereading all the underlines that I took in the book when I first read it, and there was this one section about how now it's not only that failure is bad, it's being average is now bad. And the idea that you have to be exceptional and you have to perform this successful, inspirational self on social and yet still be relatable and maybe messy and like talk about self-care, like you have to be so polished.
yeah.
And I think that like there are some challenges of emerging adulthood that are timeless, but some that are really specific to the internet and the way that our work system has completely deteriorated. Like I feel like this is probably one of the worst times to be an emerging adult, as much as like we're not dying from famine in the way that we probably were in the past, and like that's also a very western centric thing for me to say, but like I feel like we're kind of screwed in a unique way.
It's a lot. And we know that like the social safety net never existed for everybody anyway. Know our structures are racist. We know capitalism especially is racist and
Yeah.
that structural inequity is baked into the system. But I do have to say that with experts I talk to about what's kind of changed throughout different generations of emerging adults, because I think that's the other thing is we think
Mhm.
all young adults as millennials or
Yeah.
all adults as Gen Z, when in reality, it's a phase that, you know, if we're lucky enough to continue aging, all of us are going to pass through at some point. And I think the lack of social safety net is completely incompatible with what used to be the sociological markers of entry into adulthood, which were things like being financially independent, moving out of a familial home into your own home, getting married, having children if you're going to have them, finding a stable work situation, all of these things that were kind of like what it meant to become an adult and to be on your own. Now, economically, it's just harder to do them, even if you want to choose these things, even if you want to stay on this quote unquote traditional path into adulthood, which, to your point, a lot of us get knocked off of for all kinds of reasons. But even if you want to, just the point of entry is so much harder, and the barriers have kind of compounded. And then we add on top of it, we've got social where we can see, you know, whatever version of someone else's life that they've decided to share that day, good, bad, or in between. And so I think it's kind of created the perfect storm where we're at a moment where we could really redefine what it means to be a young adult in a really positive way, I think. But until the resources and the social safety net is reestablished in some capacity, materially not that much is going to change because we can't change it.
Yeah. It's funny, like I was talking recently with my dad about how I think by the time he was my age, he had already purchased his first home, and then he sold it to move to the US to go to grad school, and then he met my mom. And like, if I'm 29, my parents got married at like 30, 31,
Mm-hmm.
and there's so many things that they were able to achieve by my age that are just completely unfeasible for me, even though I have much more of an economic safety net than they did, in terms of like, if I crash and burn, I have my parents in a way that they couldn't really rely on their own family. Like, it is, even for someone like me who has enormous privilege, like, I can't afford a house. I don't think I will anytime soon. But it is such a weird, frustrating moment in history. And you sounded like almost optimistic at the end of what you just said, and yet, unless things structurally change, like, nothing will change. Like, how do you think emerging adulthood and the norms around it are shifting, if they are? And how is it? Do you feel optimism, or are you as freaked out as I am?
I feel a perfect blend of optimism and sheer terror. I feel optimism because I think the norms of young adulthood are changing. And I think the status quo of what we're going to accept as a society is changing. And I credit that a lot to young people who are learning from their elders, who are working in collaboration across generations and across different socioeconomic and geographic spaces to build a better world. And I think what's incredible about that is when you talk to a lot of them, it's not even necessarily about them. It's not like, well, I'm going to change things so I can buy a house. It's no, you know, my neighbor that's a toddler, I want to make sure it's a different world that gets inherited, and I don't want people to have to do it the way I've done it. So I'm optimistic in that regard. And I'm optimistic in the regard that I think we're changing the notion of what it means to be successful in real time. And so much of that comes into fruition in emerging adulthood because it's this time where you're supposed to be doing everything. You're supposed to be going to school, and then probably more school, and then a job, and then a better job, and constantly up the ladder. And I think we're seeing people try where they can, because it's a privilege to people to try in a lot of ways, but to embrace different sets of priorities and say, you know, my work is not where I'm going to derive all of my meaning. And it's actually not going to run my life. It's going to be the thing I do to pay my bills. And no, I don't have to stay timeline that some extraneous force somewhere out there, that doesn't feel right to me. So I'm going to try something else. And I think the more we can move in that direction, that's what makes me optimistic.
Yeah, it does feel like the norms around work, and as much as work-life balance is like a cursed term, like, I do feel like the work-life boundaries are becoming more important to people, and that the pandemic made them a lot more obvious for some folks. But this was a conversation that was happening before the pandemic even started, particularly around like labor unions having a resurgence in media, of all places, as well as in all these different industries. Like, I it's something that I paid a lot of attention to when I was still at TED Talks. Like, how can I help my team, when it came to the social media team, have these boundaries when our job was literally just the internet? Like, I think that it's starting to ripple out in really wonderful ways. And there was a part in your book where you said, like, a job can just be a job. Like, I think of it as a bit of like the nightmare of the dream job.
Yeah.
The idea that, like, you have this job that you may not even be getting paid for, as an intern because you should be getting so much out of it and you're so lucky to have that job. I feel like that you've been a really critical voice in challenging that whole concept. And I see like movements to pay interns and young people being like, I don't need to work for BuzzFeed. Like the crash and burn of BuzzFeed was happening right around when I was like 23, 24. So that's me rambling, but like I feel like this is, I don't know how much of it is generational. I don't know how much of it is just the system breaking and people getting really frustrated. But I know that was a theme that you pulled out really wonderfully in your book. And I'm curious, like, how much of the book did you write before the pandemic? And then how much has the pandemic shifted or maybe even strengthened the way that you were thinking about this?
Well, first of all, that means so much coming from you because I think writing on work and labor and burnout has been really revolutionary and kind of drawing a line in the sand where not only should abuse and like this paying your dues, very toxic culture of work not be an aspirational thing, not be something hired to do, it shouldn't be a thing at all. There's no part of that that's acceptable. And so I'm very grateful for your work in that space. In terms of the book, I think the work chapter was actually almost fully written. All of the themes about unpaid internships and dream jobs and kind of this very, in my opinion, toxic and kind of unnerving blend of how work tethers itself to our identities. All of that was there. And then we kind of went back and filled in like, oh my gosh, the pandemic shifted a lot of this. It shifted a lot of people's work situations. A lot of people that I interviewed initially about their jobs and working 3 different jobs to try and pay their bills lost some of those jobs. And it created a ripple effect throughout the entire rest of their life. For the book in general, there was a lot of updating because of the pandemic, because the deadline kind of existed in that weird space where there wasn't a ton of time to re-report the whole thing. It was going to have to into the existing narrative, but also the pandemic changed everything. It absolutely changed young adulthood. And so any book about young adulthood that came out in this period of time that didn't reference the incredible change that we had all experienced in some capacity was going to feel outdated. And I think that one of the most incredible, and incredible could be a good thing or a bad thing, I want to be clear, part of reporting that for me is over the past calendar year or so, getting to go back to people that I'd interviewed initially 2 years ago and hearing about what had changed in their life since then, either because of the pandemic or because of choices they'd made. And I think that that spoke to what a time of transition we're in as a society, and also what a time of transition this is as an age, because it was people that for one reason or another, be it because of health, because of grief, because of moving, because of losing a job, were really recalibrating what mattered to them and why it mattered. And I think that being able to hear people articulate that is just, I mean, I can't imagine a bigger privilege to have taken away over the course of the past year and a half, especially.
I'm so curious what those conversations were like because I think a lot of us have recalibrated in the last year, no matter what age you are, and I find that some people are really excited to talk about that, and some people are kind of uncomfortable and ashamed and still kind of working their way through it. Like, obviously, a lot of these folks were people you'd already interviewed, but what was the tenor of those conversations?
That's a great question. And the answer is that it really varied. There were conversations with a couple of people that they were open to talking to me personally, but then ended up, they were like, I'm just not comfortable having that in print. And even without, for people that haven't read the book, there are no last names used. We tried to give a lot of room to speak openly about their lives without the pressure of feeling like someone was going to read about their personal life in this thing that was in print. But in all capacities, even people that felt good about the choices they'd made, there was this sense of grief and kind of like standing on the precipice or on the edge of something and not really knowing what you were looking out at yet. I talked to a lot of people who either quit jobs or lost jobs, and that had this wave of like, who am I? without this one specific position? Who am I when I'm not chasing this dream and I'm not hustling hard and I'm not doing whatever it is? And I think that in that way, it's kind of like a collective identity crisis where this thing takes up so much, work in particular, it takes up so much of your time and energy, and it's connected to rent and groceries and health insurance and all these other things, that when you lose it, it's not just the material loss of losing the job. For a lot of people, it's also, who am I supposed to be without this? Like, what am I without this? And I think that seeing that recalibration of the role that labor is going to play in your identity and your dreams, I found it very personally inspiring, because it made me change a lot of things about my own relationship to work, but it's also scary.
Is petrifying. Like, as someone who during the pandemic kind of faced the same question of like, do I want to work in social media anymore? What are the work environments I want to be in? Like, it does feel like you're standing on a precipice. And it's so interesting to me that like emerging young adulthood is a stage of life where you're asking, who am I? What are my values? What I want? What do I want? And then it sounds like the pandemic had like an identity crisis on top of an identity crisis for a lot of people of like, I kind of figured it out and now I have to reevaluate all over again because I got fired or laid off, or life has just changed in these big dramatic ways. And it's forced me to kind of go back to the drawing board yet again, which is, as someone who's done it, is very weird.
I also feel like we'd be so much better off if we normalize the fact that going back to the drawing board is probably something we're going to do in some capacity throughout our lives. And that doesn't mean it's easy or even that it's a lot of fun. Sometimes it's truly traumatic and truly terrible. But I think that if we stopped trying to condense the pressure of having it figured out to this single decade of life and realized that, no, it's a good thing to kind of reassess what your values are and where you find your meaning and what holds a lot of meaning for you. That's a wonderful thing. It can be a terrible process, but it's an incredible thing. And I really wish that we would give people more space in general to kind of step back and go, okay, what matters to me and why, and what resources do I need to have that thing?
Yeah, I think that's so wise that it is something that we will return to over and over and over again in life. And like, I've watched my parents reinvent themselves. My mother became like a full-time independent journalist, like
Oh my God.
many decades into her life. Like, I'm not gonna age my mom, but like she had me, and then I went to college, and now she runs an independent website. Like, through my parents, I've seen that, but at the same time, like when I turned 29 a few months ago, you mentioned like the 30 under 30 lists in the book. And like, I thought I had kind of unpacked that in my brain of like 30 is just a number, it's not a big deal. And then I hit 29 in the pandemic and I was like, what have I achieved? This is, oh my God.
And
Yeah.
that's always the default somehow. Like, what can I point to that I've accomplished? Like, I need that I've done something, that I have worth in this world. And that to people in general, but I think especially in young adulthood, it's like these things, whether it's degrees or having saved a certain amount of money or buying a house or a job or whatever it is, we're kind of looking for these things that prove something about us. And I know a lot of the attention is on young people trying to prove something to like social media followers. But what I found in conversation is the people we're really trying to convince is us. It's ourselves. And I think that makes it a lot harder to kind of untangle.
I think that's true. Yeah, I think that's true. I think that folks oversimplify it, as our generation is super obsessed with how we appear online, but it does seem like it's much more of an internal pressure, and that gets reinforced by what we see online. But you talk in the book about like the comparison, the endless comparison of what you're seeing other people achieve online, and how that then feeds into your own worry about perfectionism and achievement because you feel like you're then behind. And I think I'm trying to remember, I couldn't find it before we talked, but you had written about like that feeling of behindness and perpetually feeling like you've missed something or you're running behind the pack. And I feel like the pandemic freaked people out about that even more. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think my big personal takeaway there is that without capitalism, behindness would not exist. But the thing about being behind, which we talk about all the time. We talk about it with little kids, like they're behind in reading, they're behind in whatever. And it's like, okay, but behind who? And who is quantifying what it means to be ahead? Who are we supposed to be ahead of? And I think that that's to the benefit of capitalism, because if we're just sprinting to catch up to whatever the next thing is, it becomes very easy to internalize that behindness and think, well, this is an individual problem and that means it has an individual solution. And the solution is that I'm going to outwork whoever this person is that I'm supposed to be chasing down. And I think behindness did get amplified in the pandemic because for one of the first times, the external markers of what it means to be successful, or what we perceive as successful, kind of stalled for a lot of people. Not only did people stop getting new jobs or getting promotions or starting side hustles, a lot of us lost those things. A lot of us moved home. A lot of us got severely ill or had family members get severely ill. It was kind of this gut check of, what have we been chasing this whole time? If it can't sustain us through this, if it can't take care of us and provide care and provide support, be it financial, be it emotional, whatever it is, through this, what was the point of all running to catch up with this next best version of ourselves? And I think that that is still one of the outstanding questions, is without the external markers that we're doing a good job and that we're quote unquote on track, what's kind of left? And I actually think that that's where we get to know ourselves the most.
Yeah, I don't want to turn this into a therapy session about myself.
Oh,
But it is like, I was so excited to talk to you because I just moved back home, and I'm coming to you live from my childhood bedroom, although I have like a nice new full-size bed. I'm no longer in a twin, but it was interesting thinking about how much we judge people who move home, the idea of it being you've quit, or you've failed to make it in the big city. And in reality, for me, I don't expect to live in my mom's house forever, but it was this interesting moment of, I don't really like New York. And
yeah.
maybe I do want to live in a suburb or explore different cities. And maybe the best financial choice for me right now is to be here and not paying through the nose in Brooklyn for an apartment. Like, for me, it was coming closer to identifying what I actually do want and what success actually does look like. And like, reading your book helped me kind of put that into context of like, why is this choice actually not a bad one? And why do I not feel any kind of weird feelings about it? And it's been interesting, like, most of my neighbors on the street still live here, and a lot of them are my parents' age, so they knew me as a little kid. And every time I bump into someone on the street, they're like, "Oh, you're back. Like, that's awesome." Like, my daughter moved home, or my grandson was here during the pandemic, or like, my daughter's here because she's saving up for her house. Like, I do feel like the pandemic helped normalize something that, at least in certain communities, is quite unusual. And the idea of like multi-generational living, I think for white people of like a certain class, is much more shameful than it is in other communities. So in a place like Greenwich, where my mom lives in like a super affluent suburb in Connecticut where all the Wall Street people are and they commute into the city, where I think it's a huge stigma, the idea of coming home and being a townie and like not leaving to go be like a real estate broker in Miami or something. And so it was really interesting to read about that in your book and kind of put that in context, and then to just see how common it has become almost overnight, even in communities like this one. And I think you've moved home. You're in Kentucky, right? Still? Yeah.
You know me well enough to know that I will just absolutely go off on this and talk for like the next 4.5 hours, which no one needs. But yes, I think first of all, the myth that every young adult moves out at 18, to your point, in a lot of communities, in a lot of cultures, whether it's for economic reasons or cultural ones, that is not the norm. It's very much a hyper individualistic, Americanized milestone of adulthood. And it's one we like to pretend has no economic repercussions and is not a decision made out of economic choices. And that's not to say that moving home is right for everyone. Not everybody has a familial home safe for them to live in. And so I think that's an important part of the conversation too. But I think the broader point is we're watching people get to decide what they need out of a home, whether that's, you know, a familial home, whether that's roommates, whether that's living by themselves if they can afford to do so, and kind of assess, what are my needs? What kind of safety do I need? What are the resources that I'm missing? Where is my community? Without this pressure of, if I haven't left wherever it is, if I haven't gone it alone, if I haven't done it all on my own, I failed. And I'm not independent, and I'm not self-reliant, and I'm not all of these things that I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
I think that that's, for me, that's been one of the most interesting things to talk to people about over the last year, because I think that we figured out very quickly, and what some of us obviously knew already and were experiencing already, is that when you really need the lifeline, when you really need care, when you really need support, very rarely is it going to be the dream job or the big accomplishment or the thing you've been chasing that saves you. Normally, what saves us are our communities, whether it's friends, whether it's family, maybe even it's colleagues sometimes. It can be whatever community looks like for you, but it's other people. And so I kind of feel like this hyper individualistic notion that you've got to leave and you've got to do it by yourself. I think we got sold a bill of goods that we've seen in real time is just not compatible with real life and real feelings for most of us.
Yeah. And it's not compatible with a crisis. Like,
No.
it's that the dream job, the idea of success that we have is not what's going to help when you are in quarantine or you're stuck in your apartment and you're losing your mind. Like,
Yeah.
or if you're sick. Like, it's the Elon Musk boss is not going to come and bring you soup when you've got COVID. Like,
No, not gonna, even if you have a job that you really love and you find really fulfilling, it's not going to be the thing that takes care of you when you feel terrible about yourself. You know, in some instances, it might make you feel a lot worse. And I remember very acutely thinking, my mom, who I'm very close with, had COVID at the kind of start of the pandemic, that March where everything was starting to kind of shift and crash and burn. And she's at the emergency room. And I just remember having this epiphany where it's like everything around me stopped. And I thought even about work I really loved, like, this does not matter at all. This just does not matter. And yeah, you can use it to try and do good where you can and put something good out. But at the end of the day, you're a human being who is in community with other human beings. And that's the priority, not whatever is happening on your laptop.
absolutely. I think one of the final straws for me at a job I had was my grandfather passed away a few years ago, and like we weren't particularly close. Like, I wasn't heartbroken, but it was still, it's painful for the whole family when you lose someone. And I told my boss, like, I'm going to be offline for 3 days, bereavement leave, like, bye bye. And I was already in my notice period, so it's kind of an awkward time to be like, the things I have to wrap up in the next 2 weeks, like, gonna have to deal with them in 6 days instead.
Yeah.
But I remember just receiving Slack messages from my boss and the rest of the team about work as usual and just being furious and having that kind of moment of, I've loved this job, I love these people, but this is not my family. As much as workplaces want to tell you that they are your family, when your family actually dies, like, you remember, oh no, these are my coworkers and they may be great people, but these KPIs are nowhere near as important as figuring out how to support people through grief. And certainly the pandemic kind of made that even more clear as people were dealing with mass death. Like, work does not know how to handle it.
We saw over and over again, whether it was restaurants laying off people because they couldn't afford to keep them, or corporations that frankly could afford to keep everybody and decided not to. Jobs had no problem letting people go during a time of crisis. They when they stop needing you, they have no problem not needing you. And I think the thing about that is that, our people, our communities, they are always going to need us. And I think that one of the things about young adulthood that I really, reporting the book just drove home over and over and over, is that we need them. We need each other, not these things we've been taught are kind of external signifiers that we're worthy of something.
It's so, oh yeah, it's so true. And it's so wonderful to have, like, I feel like something that I really like about the book is I found it funny because I found it in like the self-help section a bunch. And there are elements of it that are very useful for kind of reflecting on what's important to you, but it's a lot of research into different people's lives. It's very intersectional in the way that it explores these issues. And it's not political in the sense of you're not talking about candidates, but it's a very political, urgent book about how everything is kind of broken. And the lie as well that these are individual problems when they are never individual and the solution is never individual. It just impacts us as individuals and we think it's only us and that we're the ones who have messed up. And I think that's like, it came through super clearly in the work chapter. And when it came to things like wellness, I've ranted about burnout a million times before, but it's been weird seeing the conversation about burnout become more mainstream during the pandemic because it's like, yeah, no shit. Like, this has been a problem. And now everyone's burnt out because no one was listening 2 years ago when we were all talking about this. But I'm curious, like, in the reporting that you've done, like, do you think companies are any closer to realizing that this is not an individual thing? Because I haven't been impressed so far by what I've seen companies doing.
I, I'm not impressed either, and I'll take it even a step further. I'm not impressed with our government's capacity to understand the problems aren't individual. I'm not impressed with higher education or even, K-12 education, frankly, the capacity to realize the problems aren't individual. I think that it's so embedded in the structures of society that I'm not sure there are going to be very many workplaces that manage to do a big pivot, because I think it requires pivoting so much. I mean, we exist in a society, as you know, better than I do even, that health insurance and healthcare are luxuries. Being able to work from home or take paid sick leave or take paid leave in general, that's a luxury. It's racist, it's ableist, it's all of these things that impact how we live on such a fundamental level. And because we've tied work to all of these things too, it's kind of like, where do you even start? And part of me wonders if the solution has to be bigger and more structural than what any single company, even maybe ones that are making really great strides, and I hope they do, I hope they continue to do so, but it feels like it has to be more systemic than that, because otherwise it just feels like, again, making the problem worse, where maybe one person works for a great company and has all these things and feels very taken care of, and their neighbor is in a completely terrible situation where they're sick and they have no health insurance. So it's like, I think the way we go from here has to be kind of like big and bold and far more than what any individual can do on their own.
Yeah, to quote Elizabeth Warren, it's that like big structural change. Like,
I mean,
yeah.
I know it's cliche at this point, but it really, when you start like looking at the pieces of the puzzle, it's kind of like, well, yeah, I'm sure there are things that we can do, especially employers, that could make it better, but to make it better on a scale that is at least a little bit closer to equal, it has to be more structural than what it is we're trying to kind of piecemeal together right now, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Like, it's funny. I think that was almost like a moment where I had a limited imagination even posing the question, because it is like one company cannot one company can't lead by example when everything that is in the best interest of the company goes against treating us like actual humans. And yeah, and it's a question of profit at the end of the day, as opposed to, like, employee satisfaction is usually not at all a KPI that people track or prioritize over profit. And I think one of the things that causes burnout the most are these companies that have this laser focus on exponential growth, whether it's in article reads, video views, profit at the end of every month, and as a result, not resourcing what you actually need in order to hit that growth curve. And then you're just asking more and more and more of the same people, who are becoming more and more exhausted and less productive. As much as I hate productivity as a concept, it's like, it's companies expecting more and more and offering employees less and less support. Mm-hmm. And I do think you're right that it's so because so much of it is baked into capitalism, we need to fix the whole goddamn thing. And like, I don't know how to do that. I'm very excited. I'm not very excited to see what happens politically. I was like, I have an Elizabeth Warren quote because I was a huge Warren stan during the election of like, choose to fight only righteous fights up on my wall over there. I was looking at it and I was like, I was hopeful for a minute, but we'll see.
I was thinking about, as you were saying that, I was thinking about some comments on canceling student debt that were made. I think it was yesterday, about how, some people may not like their tax dollars going to that. Some people might have paid off their debt and wouldn't like, to have the debt of others paid off. And I just think that
Thanks, Nancy Pelosi. Thanks for that.
It's not, if we only have one takeaway from a year of mass trauma and grief, it should be that our collective well-being is collective. It is wrapped up in other people. And I think that we've seen proven over and over that the every man for himself mentality or themself mentality is not going to work. It's not sustainable. It's not how societies operate. And I think just on the personal side, it makes us really miserable. It makes us really lonely.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like going back to the example of student debt, like it is actually in everyone's best interest to cancel student debt or to move in that direction because people who have student debt can't afford homes, can't give back to the community, can't start those businesses that everyone seems to care so much about, the starting of small businesses and helping small business owners. Like it's a whole generation that's been cut off at the knees by student debt in this unprecedented way. And it really is in the best interest of the economy, of the education system, of all these different things to cancel it. But it's this hyper weird individual thinking that I'm so frustrated when even Democrats replicate it. Like I know Joe Biden said some crazy shit about it too. Like it's just so frustrating and drives me up the wall. And it's the whole concept of, I think you've talked about this recently too, like just because you suffered doesn't mean that other people should have to suffer. You never should have suffered in the first place.
I think that is exactly the point that I wish was talked about more, because people get, and to a degree I understand it, they're angry, they're hurt, they have no resources. I don't blame them. I'm pissed off as well. I'm pissed off on their behalf.
Yeah.
But the point I feel like that needs to be made is, it's like, no, it was wrong for you too. It's not that this generation is entitled and deserves something you didn't get. You deserved it too.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we have to make sure that we're untying the deservedness to labor output or to where you went to school and how able you were to pay that off in real time, or if you had parents that were paying it off for you. I think that that's actually one of the things that I hate the most about the whole quote unquote generation wars thing. I think that we get into this mentality where it's like, well, this generation has it worse. No, my generation has it worse. And I think what that skims over is how long basically the same policies have been in place that have managed to not really do right by anybody.
Yeah. Like I think it's interesting to compare, like this is an imperfect comparison, but student debt and student debt cancellation, there's the concern of like I shouldn't have to pay for that.
Right.
I had to do it and all of that. But like when it comes to talking about maternity and paternity leave and how wonderful that would be, like I don't hear a lot of parents saying like I didn't have that and so other parents shouldn't have that. Like I think there's a lot more understanding that progress is, we shouldn't criticize progress because it should have already happened. And like we shouldn't, I don't know, this is like a half-baked thought, but like it's so weird the way it happens with student debt. And like we see it kind of with healthcare too, of like other people shouldn't get healthcare for free because I've paid for it. It's like, yeah, you shouldn't have had to. And like, wouldn't it have been great if you didn't have to worry about that? Like, it's just this weird individualistic rot that prevents people from being empathetic and looking at that bigger picture.
And I do think it's tied up, and maybe this is my own bias from this reporting, but I do think it's tied up in this like individualistic capacity for the extraordinary. I think that in especially in America, we really have this ideal of ourselves as a hero that was able to triumph and be exceptional in spite of setbacks.
Mm.
And I think that what that kind of skims over is that, you know, your labor output should have nothing to do with whether you can live a safe, fulfilled life. That it just shouldn't, those things should not be tethered together. Just like your self-worth as a human being, your deservedness is not tied up in the name on your degree, or if you have a degree, your job title, these external things that we think mean something, when really they only have the meaning that society gives them. It's like, you actually mean more than that. Just you as a person, you mean more than that.
Yeah. I had a close friend who was worrying a lot about what success looks like and what have I achieved, like that. He was dealing with that kind of angst. And my comeback was always like, you're a vital member of your community. Like, so
Yeah.
many people admire you. You do all this volunteer work. Like, there's so many other ways in which you are of value beyond just like these traditional markers of what success looks like. It's frustrating the way that it encourages us to devalue things that are incredibly meaningful, like being a wonderful father, or being a community volunteer who people all know that they can depend on, or like being a badass campaign volunteer. Like, there's so many other ways that you can bring value to your community beyond just how much money you're making. Like, it's I hate it. I hate it.
True. And I think that, but I think it goes back to the idea of us needing to exist separate from our communities. When you're right, like, when you think about it, what could possibly be more valuable than the care you are able to give the people you care about, the people you are able to help, the people you're able to reach? Like, that should be something that is paramount to how we think about value and how we think about worth. And the thing about that is, it can't really be quantified, because every community is different. People's needs are different. Our own needs are very different. And so I think that if we could get to a place where we think of enoughness as something that is inherent instead of something that is earned, we'd all be better off.
Yeah, we all have inherent value and we all are enough no matter what we achieve or how much money we make or what we contribute to society. Like, humans are valuable at our core. Yeah, absolutely. So now that I have ranted about politics and systemic you, are there any other, I'm hitting you like the end of your big book launch. Is there anything that you wish you had been able to talk about more that hasn't like come up in these conversations, or like anything that you've just been on your mind that you haven't had the opportunity to vent about yet?
Oh, that's such a great question. Well, you know, there's plenty I could vent about. We would be here. We would be
You
here.
have the floor.
I think the biggest thing is just, again and again, the people that I've had, the people that I had the privilege of speaking to for the book, the people I've gotten to connect with since then, since it came out. I think that these feelings of inadequacy, of fearing an ordinary or average self, of wondering if you can even exist with that version of yourself, I think that they're far more universal than we think they are when we're kind of sitting alone in our dark rooms with our own thoughts, thinking, I'm never going to be good enough for anything and it's all my fault. And so I think the thing that I would just drive home again and again is that it's not just you. There are a lot of people that feel like there's constantly a next best self they ought to be chasing, and it's either not working for various reasons, or it is working out perfectly on paper. And unfortunately, life doesn't happen on paper, which I know is ironic to say, given that we're kind of talking about a book, but it doesn't conform always the way we think that it's going to. And I think that there is so much value just in being able to kind of sit with yourself and think, who am I and what matters to me, when all of the stuff I've been told matters, all of the stuff I've been chasing sort of falls apart. And I think that I know that can sound like kind of a hokey thing to sit and ask yourself, but those conversations I had with people, listening to them unpack that for themselves and then trying to turn it inward and do it myself, I think it really leads us closer to the idea that we aren't in it alone. and that not only do we need each other and need our communities, we need our ordinary selves. We need to not always have to be the best version all the time. And I think that that can be a good place to start from when you're trying to figure out, what is my meaning and what does all of this mean? That was really rambly. I have a lot of
having worked at TED Talks for a long time, that was a very good, like, neatly summarized idea. I learned a lot about what rambling looks like. And, like, I will say, like, I consider myself a fairly introspective, self-aware person, but I had not stopped and actually checked in with myself about a lot of those questions in quite some time. And reading your book, I have it here. Everyone should go buy it. I don't know if it's backwards in the viewfinder, but An Ordinary Age, like, I do feel like you gave me some permission and some vocabulary to just actually think about what am I doing? I sat in Fort Greene Park with the book and like a giant soda from 7-Eleven and was just like, let's think about life. So if you have not had that conversation with yourself recently, you guys should read the book, and they should follow you online, because you're still doing this reporting constantly. You're fleshing out the same themes and looking at it from new angles. I'm super curious. I haven't read your stuff recently about like higher ed, but like, how are colleges and dorm life going to change after the pandemic? Like, that's a hot mess that I'm really excited to learn more about.
It's so bad, and that story came out this week, and basically it's all going to change in another week from now, because the likelihood of people in a lot of places going back on campuses the way they thought they do seems very low at this point, but I guess we will see.
Thanks, Delta. So fun. Well, where should people find you, and if you have anything to plug other than the book? Yeah.
Oh, first of all, thank you for doing this with me. I'm the biggest fan of you, as you know. So thank you. Support Ella's work. Subscribe to Ella's work. It's important. For me, I would love it if you purchased the book or requested the book from your library. Libraries are awesome. Big fan of that. You can follow me on Twitter, which is just my name. I tweet a lot of a lot of frustrated things, and also a lot of cat photos. So I'm hoping we're striking a nice balance there.
No, I love following you on Twitter. I feel like as soon as I followed you on Twitter, I got like 10% smarter, because you, like, I have like the angry, like unformulated id when it comes to a lot of these issues. And then you usually have the same annoyance, but you go research it. And then I read it and I send it to my group chats. And I'm like, this is the thing that I was angry about with no words. So strong recommend following Rainesford on Twitter. It's just at Rainesford, and on Instagram. And Rainesford is one of my patrons, and you guys should become patrons too, because it is how I pay all of my bills now. So
really good writing. Like, it is truly good writing that will make your life better, that will make you curious, that is just a total blast to read. So yes, everyone is doing that.
It is also how I am supporting myself while working on my romance novel, which I find very funny, because I think I said this too. My romance novel is like a lot of the themes you've been exploring, but in a romance novel as opposed to a research book. So in the million years, if when that book comes out, I want to have the same conversations and be like, so Reese feels insecure because he moved in with his mom when he couldn't make his career work. So I'm just like, I'm so glad that we've become friends.
Yeah, we'll reverse roles. I'm already so excited for you.
Thank you.
I can't wait.
And special shout out to Robert, who's been watching, who's one of my patrons too, who's been in the comments. So we're all friends here. I will let you get back to your life and your family, but thank you so much for doing this. And yeah.
Thank you. And I'm probably in Twitter DMs.
Yes, I will see you on Twitter, and I will see everyone else soon. Bye.